The secret weapon that finally stopped the Mongols, the Battle of Kili, 1299. In the autumn of 1299, the thunder of 50,000 Mongol horsemen rolled across the steppes of Central Asia and onto the plains of northern India. Kutluk Khwaja, son of the great Khan Dua, direct descendant of Genghis Khan, marched toward Delhi, certain that the greatest city in the subcontinent would fall before him as so many others had fallen. No wall had held, no army had survived. The entire world had learned to tremble at the cloud of dust that preceded the Mongol hooves. But what awaited them at Kili was not fear. It was not surrender. It was a sultan who had quietly built something no one had possessed before. A system, a trap, a weapon the world did not yet know. On the plains north of Delhi, Alauddin Khalji waited with tens of thousands of men, 700 war elephants arranged in perfect rows, and an iron discipline that would challenge every last tactic of Mongol terror. And then, without permission, without orders, without looking back, a single general shattered the entire strategy. Zafar Khan charged forward. The earth shook. Dust swallowed the horizon. Lances crossed the air. Horses fell. Men screamed. The Mongol army, accustomed to victory in every corner of the known world, found itself facing something it had never encountered. When the dust finally settled over the plains of Kili, the Mongol prince lay dying. His armies turned their horses northward, and Delhi, the city no one believed could be saved, still stood. That afternoon changed the history of the subcontinent, and the echo of that day resonated across the centuries as the first great failure of the most feared war machine in the medieval world. To understand what happened at Kili, it is necessary to understand what the Mongols were in 1299. They were not simply an army, they were a force of nature. From the plains of Mongolia, Genghis Khan had unleashed in the 13th century a chain of conquests unprecedented in human history. His hordes had devoured China, Persia, Russia, Poland, and the heart of the Islamic world. Baghdad, the most learned city on earth, had fallen in 1258, burned and plundered in a massacre that contemporary chroniclers described as the end of the world. The Mongol Empire had fractured after the civil wars of the 13th century into four great khanates. The Chagatai Khanate controlled Central Asia, and its leader since the 1280s had been Dua Khan, a calculating warrior who gazed southward with growing ambition. To the north and east, his Mongol rivals closed off any possible expansion. Only toward India was there space, and in India stood the Delhi Sultanate. Mongol invasions of India were nothing new. Since 1241, the northwest of the subcontinent had bled repeatedly under the raids of the Chagatai Khanate. But they had always been plundering incursions. Steal, kill, leave. Never a permanent conquest. What arrived in 1299 was different. Kutluk Khwaja's army had not come to plunder. It had come to stay. Chroniclers recorded with astonishment that during 6 months of marching toward Delhi, the Mongols attacked no city and destroyed no fort. They were conserving themselves. This was not a raid. It was a conquest, and the moment seemed perfectly chosen. The Sultanate's main army was far away, campaigning in Gujarat. Delhi lay exposed. The opportunity was singular. Dua Khan saw it and sent his favorite son to seize it. Two men would define the fate of that battle. Two figures whose relationship, filled with admiration and rivalry, with genius and distrust, would decide the future of the subcontinent. Alauddin Khalji was approximately 40 years old in 1299. He had not arrived at the throne by quiet birthright. In 1296, he had murdered his own uncle, Sultan Jalaluddin, at a meeting Jalaluddin believed to be a peace gathering. He was the nephew who had returned victorious from a campaign in Devagiri, laden with gold, and used that wealth to purchase the loyalty of generals. The crime was brutal, the consolidation merciless. But what followed was the reign of one of the most brilliant rulers medieval India would ever know. Alauddin was a calculator. From the first day of his reign, he had initiated radical military reforms. He paid his soldiers in cash, directly from the royal treasury. He controlled market prices so the army could sustain itself without destroying the economy. He built forts along the northwest frontier, trained his troops in new formations. He was a man who understood that war, in the end, was a problem of logistics and discipline, but he was also a man who feared the popularity of others. And in that autumn of 1299, the most popular general in the Sultanate was not the Sultan. It was Zafar Khan. Hizabruddin Zafar Khan was not a Turk. He was most likely of Punjabi origin, a man who had risen through sheer military merit from the ranks to become the most feared commander in the army of Delhi. In 1298, he had defeated a Mongol army at Jaran Manjur with such brutal efficiency that chroniclers recorded 20,000 Mongols dead. The entire country celebrated him. Poets sang his name. In the markets they called him the Shield of India. Alauddin watched him with a mixture of admiration and jealousy he could never resolve in his heart. Zafar Khan was exactly the kind of general a sultan needed, and exactly the kind of man a paranoid sultan feared. When popular love for the general began to threaten his power, Alauddin pushed him away from Delhi. He sent him to govern the frontier at Samana. It was not a formal exile, it was subtler and crueler. Facing them, Kutlu Khwaja was the perfect instrument of his father's ambition, young, gifted, bearer of Genghis Khan's blood. He had grown up on the steppes listening to stories of world conquest. For him, India was not a problem. It was simply the next chapter of a story his lineage had already written across 4 continents. He arrived at the plains of northern India with the absolute certainty that belongs to those who have never been defeated. For 6 months, the Mongol army had crossed the Hindu Kush, descended through the Punjab, and advanced toward the heart of the Sultanate with a discipline that defied all logic for an army in enemy territory. Without plundering, without stopping, without wasting energy, Alauddin's generals posted at Multan and Samana tried to harass them every night, but the Mongols avoided contact, conserved their strength, and marched. Zafar Khan from Kuram sent a messenger to the Mongol camp. The challenge was direct. Kutlu's response was a calculated insult. Kings only fight kings. Let Zafar go and meet his master Alauddin under the royal banner. The message was clear. The Mongols recognized no general of the Sultanate as worthy of their prince. When news of the Mongol advance reached Delhi, the city fell into panic. Families abandoned the surrounding villages and ran toward the walls. Streets filled with refugees, markets closed, food prices soared, mosques overflowed with worshippers praying with an urgency that mingled devotion with terror. The pulse of the city, normally so vibrant, had become the erratic pulse of one who waits for a blow they know is coming. Alauddin had barely 1 or 2 weeks to prepare. His main army was in Gujarat. His advisors counseled him unanimously, "Do not fight, negotiate, shut yourself inside the fort." Malik Alaul Mulk, the Kotwal of Delhi, warned him personally that the Mongols were too numerous, too powerful, too close. Alauddin listened to them and then rejected every piece of advice. He marched toward them, but he marched with a strategy that was the opposite of what Zafar Khan would have wanted. Alauddin did not want an immediate battle. He wanted time. The Mongol army had traveled thousands of kilometers over 6 months. Their horses were exhausted, their provisions were limited. If he could hold his positions without attacking, the Mongols would eventually run short of food and withdraw. It was a war of nerves, not of swords. The formations he deployed on the plains of Kili were a work of military engineering. 5 great divisions, each preceded by 22 war elephants. The elephants were not merely symbols of power. They were the specific tactical answer to the problem of Mongol cavalry. The steppe horses, perfectly trained to maneuver in open field, had never encountered anything like a war elephant in battle formation. The smell, the noise, the unstoppable mass of those enormous armored beasts generated in Mongol horses a primal panic that no training could fully overcome. This was the secret weapon Alauddin had quietly built over years. 110 elephants in the front line. Behind them, thousands of infantry with spears and shields, and behind those, the heavy cavalry, a living wall, a tactical trap that forced the Mongols to abandon their advantages and fight on the defenders' terms. Alauddin's order was absolute and threatening. No general would move from position without direct instruction from the Sultan. Disobedience would be paid with the head. The two armies faced each other from their positions. The plains of Kili, some 10 kilometers from the suburbs of Delhi, became the most tense space in the medieval world at that moment. The air smelled of dust and the sweat of thousands of men and beasts. The Mongol banners fluttered in the cold autumn wind of northern India. The banners of the Sultanate answered from the opposite side of the field. Alauddin waited. The Mongols waited. And time passed. Then Zafar Khan did what he should never have done, and in doing it, he changed everything. No one knows exactly why he charged. Medieval chroniclers gave different versions. Perhaps it was impatience. Perhaps it was the wounded pride of a man who could not bear to sit still while the enemy camped at the gates of his city. Perhaps it was resentment toward the Sultan who had marginalized him and who now ordered him not to move. Or perhaps he was simply what every chronicler who knew him described, a man of fire, consumed by fire, without orders, without warning. Without looking back, Zafar Khan signaled to his right wing and charged against a Mongol unit commanded by Hijlak. The initial impact was devastating. The right flank of the Sultanate's army lunged forward like a hammer of steel and dust. Hijlak's Mongols fell back. For an instant it seemed Zafar Khan had been right. It seemed the charge would break the Mongol line before the Sultan could even protest. But the Mongols were not retreating out of fear. They were retreating like bait on a hook. It was the feigned retreat tactic that the descendants of Genghis Khan had perfected across 3 generations. The false army that flees and draws the enemy cavalry out of its formation, away from its support into a void where the hunter becomes the prey. Zafar Khan took the bait. His cavalry accelerated in pursuit of the fleeing Mongols. The infantry, unable to match that pace, fell further and further behind. The distances stretched, the formation dissolved in the dust, and the most brilliant general of the Delhi Sultanate, looking forward with burning eyes, did not notice the precise moment when he ceased to be the hunter. 30 kilometers, 40, 55. When Zafar Khan finally halted his men to regroup, he looked around and saw the full magnitude of the disaster. He had barely 1,000 horsemen with him. His foot soldiers had vanished into the distance, and at his back, the Mongol general Targi had closed the circle, cutting off the road back to Alauddin's camp. The encirclement was perfect, the geometry of death, drawn with the precision of a people who had studied war more than anyone in the world. Alauddin observed what was happening from the main camp. He knew what that dust on the horizon meant, that sudden absence of his right wing. He knew the general who had disobeyed his orders was now trapped. He sent no reinforcements. This is the part of the story that chroniclers always regarded with discomfort. Ulugh Khan, the Sultan's brother and commander of the left wing, had troops and position to relieve Zafar Khan. Some wrote that he bore personal grudges against the army's most famous general. Others said simply that he was following instructions. The probable truth was darker. Alauddin saw in this moment an opportunity to resolve, in one stroke, the political problem that Zafar Khan represented for his power. The most beloved hero of India was going to die on the plains of Kili, and the Sultan would not lift a finger to prevent it. In the encirclement, Zafar Khan gathered his men. What followed was one of those moments that medieval chroniclers described with the language reserved for the heroes of the most ancient times, surrounded, without possibility of return, with the certainty that even if he miraculously broke out of the trap, Alauddin would execute him for disobedience. Zafar Khan looked at his men and decided that if he had to die, he would die in such a way that the world would remember him. A messenger arrived at the encirclement. He had been sent by Kutluk Khwaja himself. The message, recorded by chroniclers with an admiration they could not conceal, was this: "Come to me. I will take you to my father, who will grant you greater dignity than the king of Delhi has ever given you." Zafar Khan ignored it. What followed was a slaughter that unfolded in exactly the opposite direction from what the Mongols expected. With barely 1,000 horsemen at the start, surrounded by vastly superior forces, Zafar Khan did not prepare to surrender or to survive. He prepared to kill, and he killed. 14th century chroniclers, particularly Isami, recorded that Zafar Khan and his men fell upon the Mongol encirclement with a ferocity that defied all military logic. With 800 of their own men lost, they inflicted 5,000 deaths on the army surrounding them, 5,000 Mongols dead. From a man who was trapped with no possibility of victory. Horses fell. Sultanate soldiers fought on foot when their mounts were cut down. Zafar Khan fought at the center of the chaos, visible to all, impossible to stop. When his own horse was struck by a saber and fell, the general rose from the dust, took his bow, and began to bring down Mongols one by one with his arrows, while his last 200 men fought around him. Kutluk Khwaja, understanding that this man could not be taken alive, gave the order that no victorious commander should ever need to give: cover him with arrows. Kill him from a distance. You cannot reach him in close combat. An arrow found the gap between Zafar Khan's armor and his chest. It pierced his heart. The most brilliant general of the Delhi Sultanate fell on the plains of Kili without surrendering, without pleading, without looking back. But in the tumult of that final battle, in the carnage Zafar Khan had unleashed before falling, Kutluk Khwaja had been gravely wounded. The Mongol prince, who had arrived with the certainty of a predestined conqueror, now lay in his campaign tent with wounds that his physicians regarded in troubled silence. For the next 2 days, the two armies faced each other from their positions. The Mongols did not attack. Alauddin did not attack either. The field of Kili became a space of dense silence, where initiative had been lost on both sides, and only waiting would determine the outcome. The 110 elephants of the Sultanate remained in formation, motionless as living hills, gazing northward to where the steppe horsemen waited on their small, swift horses. The Mongol horses, even from that distance, showed signs of the ancestral unease that elephants produced in them. It was a deep, instinctive disturbance that no training could eliminate. The second day ended without combat, the third day the same. And that night, without announcement, without negotiation, without ceremony, the Mongol army began to move northward. It was not a chaotic rout. It was an orderly march of an army that had not been destroyed, but had lost its momentum. Kutluk Khwaja was carried on a litter. His wounds would not close. Alauddin ordered them to be let go. When the dawn sun lit the plains of Kili the morning after the retreat, the landscape held the traces of everything that had occurred. The dust of tens of thousands of men and beasts still floated in the cold air. Fallen banners marked the road of those who had gone, and in the sector where the army's right wing had charged and then disappeared into the horizon, the silence was different. It was the silence of a place where something irreversible had happened. The soldiers who survived returned with the eyes of those who have seen what extreme valor looks like when stripped of all hope of survival. They told what they had witnessed: the charge, the encirclement, the last battle, the 5,000 Mongols dead, the final arrow. Alauddin listened to the reports with an expressionless face. Then he gave the order that would seal Zafar Khan's place in the Sultanate's official history forever. You will not speak of him. His name will not appear in the chronicles of this kingdom. He died in disobedience to royal orders. The Sultan, who had built the most efficient military system medieval India would ever know, was incapable of acknowledging that that system had survived only because a man who refused to obey had saved it. The debt was too great to admit. In Delhi, when news of the Mongol retreat reached the city, the relief was so profound it was indistinguishable from disbelief. Families opened their doors and came out into the streets. Markets that had shut their stalls before the advancing Mongols began to reopen. Food prices that had surged during the panic began to fall. The city that had been next in a chain of conquests that began with Baghdad breathed freely for the first time in weeks. Kutlug Khwaja died during the journey home. His wounds, treated across days of forced march, proved fatal in the end. The prince who had left Transoxiana, certain he would add India to the territories of the Chagatai Khanate, was buried somewhere along the road back, in lands that were not his own. The Battle of Kili was one of those moments that history sometimes disguises as incomplete victories to conceal its true magnitude. At first glance, it seemed no one had fully won. The Sultanate had lost its finest general, partly because of the Sultan himself. The Mongols had reached the gates of Delhi and retreated without being annihilated, wounded but not destroyed. But the years that followed told a different story. The Mongols returned in 1303 with more than 100,000 horsemen under the command of a general named Taragai. They reached Delhi, and they left without having taken it. Alauddin had in the meantime built the city of Siri, a second defensive ring around Delhi that the Mongols could not break. In 1305, at the Battle of Amroha, the armies of the Sultanate inflicted the most decisive defeat on the Mongols in the subcontinent. Thousands of prisoners were brought to Delhi. The message was unmistakable. In 1306, the last great invasion of Alauddin's reign was destroyed so completely by the general Malik Kafur that the prisoners were paraded through the streets of Delhi as a public demonstration of the new order. Duwa Khan died that same year. With him died the project of Mongol conquest of India. No army of the Chagatai Khanate would ever again threaten Delhi with the same intensity. What was the secret weapon? Modern historians point to several. The war elephants upended the Mongol tactical equation that depended on cavalry mobility in open field. Alauddin's military reforms, which created a professional army paid in cash, guaranteed a permanent force that did not dissolve between campaigns. The patience to hold position, to refuse the trap of premature battle, demonstrated a strategic maturity the Mongols had not expected from an adversary they believed inferior. But there is one more secret weapon that the Sultanate's official chronicles refused to record. A man. A Punjabi general named Hizabruddin Zafar Khan, who disobeyed an order and in doing so planted 5,000 Mongol corpses on the plains of Kili, mortally wounded the prince leading the invasion, terrorized the most feared army of the medieval world, and shattered the myth of invincibility that was, ultimately, the most powerful weapon the Mongols possessed. Fear. Fear was what made kings open the gates of cities before the Mongol armies even arrived. Genghis Khan had not conquered the world with horses and arrows alone. He had conquered it with the certainty he planted in the hearts of his enemies, that resistance was futile. Zafar Khan broke that certainty. He paid for it with his life, and he was erased from the official record by a sultan who needed the glory of that day to be his alone. But the Mongols remembered. The chroniclers of the Chagatai Khanate noted for internal use that Delhi's army was unlike any they had faced. It did not flee, it did not negotiate. It had generals who preferred death to surrender. Barani wrote that the Mongols had a custom in the years after Kili. When their horses refused to drink water, they would ask them mockingly whether they had seen Zafar Khan. It was a soldier's joke, the kind of joke that only exists when the fear behind it is real. The name the Sultanate had erased from its chronicles was preserved by a deep irony in the folklore of the very enemies that name had terrified. History has that kind of irony. Delhi survived. The Sultanate survived. And in the centuries that followed, in the annals of the great empires of the Indian subcontinent, from the Sultanate to the Mughal Empire and beyond, the year 1299 stood marked as the turning point. The moment when India said no to the tide that had swallowed the known world. The moment when a system, a doctrine, an idea about how an army must be organized and how it must be made to stand proved more powerful than the brute force of conquest. Not all battles are won with total victories. Some are won with the determination not to retreat, with the patience to wait, with the sacrifice of a man who chose fire over surrender. Zafar Khan died on the plains of Kili, with no one in power acknowledging what he had done. His name was erased from official texts. The Sultan who sent him to the frontier, who refused reinforcements when he was surrounded, who condemned him publicly for disobedience even after his death, lived to watch his kingdom, the kingdom that man had saved, flourish for 2 decades more. But history, which is more just than sultans, kept the name. It kept it in the texts that survived time. It kept it in the memory of the enemies who never forgot him. It kept it in the simple fact that Delhi remained Delhi, that the mosques his people had filled in panic during that week in 1299 stayed open, that the markets reopened, that the children who had run to hide behind the walls came out again to play in the streets. That is what Zafar Khan bought with his life. Not glory, not a monument, not a single line in the Sultan's chronicles, only the continuation of the world they knew. And that, in the end, is the kind of victory that time can never erase.